Hi everyone, my name is Kelsey and I'm here to talk with you a little bit about dysgraphia, a little known but very important learning difference. Dysgraphia is a difficult learning difference to diagnose because it's not officially listed on IEPs or 504s in Illinois and in many other states. If you add to that the fact that people with dysgraphia often have dyslexia, ADHD, or are on the spectrum, the lines get blurry for teachers to understand dysgraphia in its purest sense. Dysgraphia is a neurological learning difference, much like dyslexia, although research in science is still happening to determine the specific causes of dysgraphia. Teachers and parents may notice that their student has difficulty writing, but may not know how to help. There are 6 varieties of dysgraphia, each of which poses some challenges and many different things that we can work through. We'll dive into that more soon. There are also so many different teaching strategies and modifications that we can provide as teachers to support the writers and what they need. So if we think of this like a pyramid, basically people who have dysgraphia struggle with connecting sounds or parts of sounds into words, and then that translates into difficulty with writing. Thinking like a pyramid, generating and organizing ideas is the broadest reaching type of dysgraphia. Then we move down to the sentence level, which looks at capitals and spacing of writing. Moving downward, there's word formation. These students struggle with spelling and with orthographic cues. Then there's memory type, where students have trouble with recalling information. And at the smallest and finest point on the pyramid, there are fine motor and visual-spatial dysgraphia. These students usually struggle with things like grasping a pencil and placing letters in left to right sequence along a page. You might be asking yourself, why? Well, the cerebellum, part of the brain, coordinates muscle activity. If there's a low amount of neurons firing in that area, then that leads to low motor coordination. That's thinking about grip and being able to hold a pen or pencil. There's also research happening around whether people with dysgraphia may have underdeveloped or longer neural pathways in the cerebellum. Basically, it's something caused from the brain, but research is still pending. Despite the fact that people with dyslexia may have high spatial reasoning skills, kids with dysgraphia often struggle with being able to space out letters or copy text. So they have low spatial reasoning. Finally, there's the graphomotor loop. The dysgraphic brain needs lots of repeated practice to match a sound to its letter name, and then recall and make the correct strokes of a pencil. Basically, there's a lot of pieces that have to fit together in order to make writing work. If this loop or this puzzle piece is disconnected, then the working memory is low, and students need lots of exposure to the skills. Dysgraphia is rarely presented in isolation. You want to keep an eye out for how students and what students are writing to understand the inner workings of their brain. These students are not lazy or sloppy. Writing can actually be physically painful and mentally draining if you have dysgraphia. It can be hard to diagnose and instruct to dysgraphia specifically due to the reasons mentioned before, but there are some clear telltale signs that will help you as an educator identify exactly what your students need to succeed. Dysgraphia frequently is found in students who also have other neurological differences like dyslexia, ADHD, or autism spectrum disorder. Thinking back to that pyramid, the different types of dysgraphia help us to understand what exactly our students and writers need to be successful. Students who struggle with organizing a lot of ideas may have a type of dysgraphia based around paragraph formation. That means that talking and writing about and organizing ideas is hard. This is a pretty broad type, and most often it is noticeable in more mature writers as they're expected to write essays and theses and longer compositions. Looking at the big picture, these students may have disorganized or run-on thoughts that go off on tangents. It can be hard to identify what exactly the writer is trying to communicate in these pieces. Multiple and repeated exposures to content that the students will be writing about helps to bridge that gap between what they're thinking, what they know, and what they'll write. It's also worth noting that students who have paragraph formation dysgraphia tend to dislike graphic organizers because many times they are far too complex for students to keep track of. There's too many ways to organize. So using something like an SPO, a single paragraph outline, helps to streamline that plan. We also highly recommend that students with dysgraphia and paragraph formation work on rehearsing and sub-vocalizing their writing ideas over and over, as practice makes permanent. Another type of dysgraphia is called sentence formation. When you zoom into a student's writing from the big picture down, you may notice that they start to write on the lines, but they veer off in other directions or write in the margins. There also may be limited or inconsistent use of spacing between words and letters that overlap each other. That cues me in to the fact that this student may struggle with understanding the difference between an individual letter, a grapheme, and a word. Students with sentence formation have trouble with making words look like run-ons, and it's hard to tell where words end and begin. The spacing is often misused and misplaced, and this leads to low fluency and speed generally. Then comes word formation. And for all of my classmates and friends who work at Redwood, you know that word formation is the thing that gets the most attention here at Redwood because it basically is Wilson. Word formation is looking in at the individual single words and how students used to spell. So whether students have dysgraphia, they might struggle with the orthographic and graphemic awareness. That means being able to understand which symbol represents which sound and which sound they need to use to generate the words. It's all very confusing, but there is hope because here at Redwood, we use Wilson. We want to make sure that students don't confuse spelling rules and have multiple exposures to the spelling rules in their own writing. So applying whatever substep that students are on in Wilson will help to make sure that students are practicing applying those writing skills and encoding skills to their own writing. If you've ever visited the world of OT, you probably are pretty familiar with motor dysgraphia. These writers need explicit handwriting instruction as they struggle with letter formation, motor planning, descender and ascender letters grip, and they often over erase. These students have a really hard time with handwriting and need explicit practice. Kids with motor dysgraphia can find writing physically painful. They're probably holding the pencil pretty awkwardly and really hard. Make sure to work in lots of fine motor movement breaks while you're working on handwriting. Moving down the pyramid, we have visual-spatial dysgraphia. This sensory information entering the brain is misinterpreted. So that means that those students have trouble discerning the difference between letters, numbers, and symbols. It's not only thinking about the orthographic understanding and the graphemes, also integrating numbers and symbols. Often this kind of writer works their way in unexpected directions, looping around the page. A word starts in one corner and ends in the next, rather than writing left to right and skipping lines. These writers may also be observed to watch their hand as it writes, rather than the letters as they form after the fact. There is some research that proves that people with strokes and other circumstances have had evidence of visual-spatial dysgraphia, but when we look at students, the biggest evidence is if a student is having trouble orienting themselves to the page and are not working in a sequential and left to right order. But there is hope because here at Redwood we know that neurons that fire together wire together. The brain can adapt and cultivate skills with repeated exposure and lots of explicit instruction, and that is why we are all here. There are several different ways to help. My biggest takeaway for all of you is to know that first and foremost, we need explicit handwriting work. Structured, explicit handwriting work like Handwriting Without Tears or other programs helps students to understand the strokes, to differentiate the strokes, and then to make the different letters. We highly encourage students to use cursive when able because it helps with the connectivity and builds fluency. You'll also be learning about a couple of OT modifications that help to take that physical pressure off and help students build their muscle memory so that they become stronger and physically stronger writers. And then we add in the composition piece, which is with structured writing in small chunks. Taking it piece by piece is super helpful for kids with dysgraphia. All that will add up to new and improved neural networks. For students who struggle with paragraph formation, creating ideas, organizing ideas, they need lots of time to plan their ideas and lots of exposures to a topic before they even put pencil to paper. If language and rapid naming of words is a struggle, you can try using a basic checklist like the one you see here with the 5 W questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. As writers collect information on the topic they're going to write, they just have to check off which question is answered on the first couple of initial plannings. Then later, have them sketch or dictate while you sketch. Gradually scaffolding back, students can give it a try and add in a few words to explain what the different elements are of their writing as they plan. This is just a planning document, so you could even have students do this with dry erase marker in a sheet protector. This takes away the pressure of perfection and makes it purely a practice activity, which is highly encouraged for kids with dysgraphia, as there's usually an element of perfectionism. When we think about sentence formation, those are kids who need to work on being able to differentiate and space out letters in addition to using capitals. So we want to build fine motor skills with low stake and multi-sensory tools that can easily erase, because that way kids can quickly try it over again and practice lots. Kids with dysgraphia benefit from tracing activities and lots of practice with multi-sensory activities like Play-Doh, sand trays, gel pouches, tracing trays. You can also use a spacer to explicitly teach how and when to space the letters apart, which will help kids from overlapping their letters or creating run-on words. When we think of word formation, again, that's pretty much Redwood in a nutshell. We're thinking about Wilson and that systematic explicit encoding instruction. Students who struggle with word formation have trouble with spelling and applying rules. Wilson is explicit and systematic and structured, and it's a literacy program that helps to connect the graphomotor and orthographic loops and really ties everything together. When writers get to words that they have not learned the patterns of, Siri or Co-Writer is also a great resource for them. These AT systems can take off that heavy lifting of having to think about the encoding of words that are unfamiliar, vocabulary that they haven't had much experience with, and just work on that fluency piece of spelling the words that they have practiced with within their sub-steps in Wilson. This also, Co-Writer, helps to support working memory because students don't have to hold on to the information and ideas that they want to write over multiple sessions. They can use text-to-speech to write an initial draft and then write by hand when they're ready. Or they can use text-to-speech to spell those words that are unfamiliar, spell out and practice working through the words that they know. Moving down to fine motor, that's where we think about our friends that have trouble with things like grip. They have trouble with motor, fine motor work and being able to have muscle memory. So to support fine motor development, use tools like a lap board or even a binder. If you leave it flat, it's an incline. And what that does is it takes the pressure off of the wrist and it makes it much more physically comfortable for students. So all this being said, please remember that dysgraphia is a neurological learning difference, but brains are flexible. They're amazing. With targeted, explicit handwriting curriculum, writing can open minds and doors. If you have any questions or any ideas about how you could use OT or handwriting or structured writing in your classroom, please feel free to shoot me an email, and my information is there. Have a great day, everyone.